that the number of victims could not be less than 100. If he had dared open his eyes at the top of his ark, Kidd would have seen the Mississippi Valley laid out before him. Downriver was the great city of New Orleans, the commercial emporium of the Midwest, the principal channel through which Southern cotton flowed to the global economy and foreign capital came into the United States, the largest slave market in North America, and the central artery of the continent's white overseers' flirtation with the perverse attractions of global racial domination. Upriver lay hundreds of millions of acres of land that had been forcibly incorporated into the United States through diplomacy with the great powers of Europe and violence against Native Americans, Africans, African Americans, and Creole whites. Land that had been promised to white yeoman farmers but was being worked by black slaves. Land that had been stripped bare and turned to the cultivation of cotton. Land in the United States of America that was materially subservient to the caprice of speculators in distant markets. Land, and cotton and slaves, for which in a few short years young men would fight and die. He might have seen a flash-pan image of the catastrophe, at once imperial, ecological, economic, moral, that haunted the visions of progress and plenty by which the Valley's masters had charted the course of its history. That history, the history of slavery, capitalism, and imperialism in the 19th century Mississippi Valley, began with a dream, specifically a dream in the mind of Thomas Jefferson, the philosopher, visionary, slaveholder president of the United States in 1803. Jefferson's hope for the Mississippi Valley was that the abundance of land would produce a harvest of self-sufficient, non-commercial white households headed by the yeoman patriarchs whom he associated with Republican virtue, a flowering of white equality and political independence, an empire for liberty. The notion of an empire for liberty had embedded within it a theory of space. Given enough land, migrants from the East would naturally be transformed into a freeholding Republican yeomanry. Spread out across the landscape, white farmers would have to provide for themselves. They would be too removed from cities to be reliant upon them for their basic needs, or to develop other needs they could not meet themselves. Too distant from credit networks to find themselves ensnared in the sort of debtor-creditor relationships that could compromise their political independence, and too far from factories to become dependent upon wages paid by others for their daily sustenance. These yeoman farmers would be self-sufficient, equal, and independent, masters of their own destiny. Necessity would be more than the mother of invention. It would give birth to independence, maturity, freedom. Jefferson's vision of social order through expansion had, at its heart, a household-based notion of political economy. Rather than cities sprawling across the American landscape, bound together by invisible financial networks and all too visible factories, white households were to be the serially reproduced units by which progress was measured. Go to the West and visit one of our log cabins and number its inmates, enthused one latter-day Jeffersonian. There you will find a strong, stout youth of 18, with his better half, just commencing the first struggles of independent life. 30 years from that time visit them again, and instead of 2 you will find in the same family 22. That is what I call the American multiplication table. The spatial aspect of the empire for liberty was defined more by reproduction than production. The vast lands of the Louisiana Purchase would allow the United States to freeze economic history at a given moment and develop through expansion rather than diversification, through the proliferation of the gendered hierarchies of household social order rather than through the intensification of class hierarchies of Eastern, urban, industrial development. The liberties promised by Jefferson's vision depended upon racial conquest. Through a series of military and diplomatic actions, most notably the Louisiana Purchase, the defeat of the Creek Nation at Horseshoe Bend in 1814 and of the British at New Orleans in 1815, the Spanish cession of the Florida parishes and the Choctaw land cessions at Doak's Stand.